open as well. But to start off, so that they can actually be talking and have a more open dialogue, but I will start it off by probably asking some questions about, as what is stated in the panel discussion. What are the key design consideration when you want to optimize the quality of experience on a carrier-grade Wi-Fi network? Yeah, I guess since Lonnie in the early morning presented the importance of being able to manage and optimize a hacknet infrastructure and how that can differentiate a carrier-grade Wi-Fi from a normal offloading type of environment. Maybe that questions. I'll start with Lonnie, then we can go down to the panels.
Okay, thank you. I think that there's been a lot of discussion over the last 2 days about how do you best build out these networks and how do you maximize the service delivery to the customer. And we've had a gentleman here in the front, I don't see him now, but we had a gentleman in the front that was very focused on how do you focus on, how do you select products for these networks. I guess they're approaching a build in the Philippines. And I think that you need to focus, obviously, on a couple of things. For a carrier to do this, you need to focus on, obviously, scalability. You need to focus on reliability of infrastructure. You need to focus on the customer experience. And I think ultimately it comes back to the operator. What is it you're looking to achieve? Again, are you looking to monetize a service and Wi-Fi as a service? Are you looking to monetize that? Are you looking to use Wi-Fi as a churn reduction tool? Are you looking at Wi-Fi for inbound, outbound roaming propositions? Again, or is it the more traditional offload proposition that you're looking to achieve? You have to first focus on those strategic initiatives and directions. You need to understand what objectives you have in meeting that strategy. Then I think that you need to focus very much on being able to maximize the customer experience through delivering a service that is reliable and tangible to the consumer. Our approach is we believe very much that Wi-Fi and cellular need not be two parallel infrastructures, but you can begin to manage them more as a consistent service delivery architecture, much more like a headnet, like we're beginning to talk much more about. So I think if you take both a top-down approach to what's your strategy and how to achieve that, and focus on a bottom-up as well, and focus on how do I maximize that customer experience, after that it becomes an engineering exercise. And selecting the right products. We've got plenty of them in the room today that can help to understand how best to architect these networks. But fundamentally, you've got to understand what you want to do, to whom you want to provide value, and then the objectives on meeting those strategies. So in my mind right now, it's much more, what's the business? What's the business opportunity? What's the business proposition? How do you deliver that business? As opposed to, is this access point better than that access point?
Yeah, I think there's no question that I agree that the ubiquity of the footprint of a wireless network is the key. You have to be, we talked yesterday at the panel about being in the places where people are. If you're not there, you can't reliably build the customer base and the services on top of that endear your customers to your service and cause them to come back and continue paying more for new services. So the first idea, clearly, I 100% agree, gets to the scale and reliability of the underlying infrastructure itself, and how to provide a single point of services delivery on top of that infrastructure. We do a lot of work with HomeSpot technology in addition to carrier Wi-Fi. So that is deploying carrier Wi-Fi inside of people's homes in the United States. Over 10 million hotspots now inside of people's homes in the United States based on equipment that has already been deployed by the service provider. So this is really, these are natural places to extend the carrier Wi-Fi footprint. And so the reason to do that really is not just for the convenience of the subscriber or as an amenity service, but the reason to do that is to lay the groundwork for a consistent service footprint across all of a service provider's points of connection, whether it's a wireline connection, whether it's a mobile connection over Wi-Fi or other unlicensed technology, whether it's a connection ultimately over a licensed technology. I agree, it doesn't matter. That service footprint, that service model needs to be consistent across the entire footprint that's built by the operator, and so too extend into roaming agreements, so that when someone travels, not just across an international border, but really anywhere inside of an enterprise, across a country border, that those services are very consistent. You and I actually had a discussion yesterday as we were getting introduced about the idea of session continuity versus service continuity. There's certainly some very complicated networking constructs which exist in order to provide this ultimate goal of an intuitive service that customers will come to. I know when I think about my focus groups, the folks that are in my life that are not technologists, they don't care what LTE is other than the fact that it's 3 letters on their phone. They don't ultimately care what Wi-Fi is. They just want services to work. They want the apps that they open to work. They want it to be intuitive. They don't want to worry about having to get connected. And so to me, a carrier Wi-Fi network does start with the first principles of service provider networking that have been around for 4 decades, which is ubiquity, reliability, having dependability in the network, but then really evolves to having the service mobility on top of that so that services are ubiquitous across the entire footprint.
Yeah, maybe we want to hear from the 2 operators' point of view.
I think it's important to recognise that big Wi-Fi networks, especially ones in cities, are living, breathing things. You don't just set them up and let them go and monitor for alerts. They need continuous tuning, and the environment always changes because you're not in control of the environment. So there are devices in there that aren't your devices, aren't your customers, that can influence the network. And also even the software vendors. Apple, every time they release a new version of iOS, they have a tendency to tune how it reacts to Wi-Fi, and that feeds back into the entire network, and we need to be able to tune our whole network to cater for the next Apple change. And even the day they release the iOS update, we get a lot more traffic, a lot more RF interference from everyone downloading the updates.
I think once we start talking about anything that's going to be futuristic, we'll have to look at how networks are going to evolve in future before we talk about anything else. How I see networks evolving in future is that we'll have 3 parallel layers running. One will be the network layer, the second is your services layer, and then is your application layer. Because at the end of the day, if we're talking about Wi-Fi, we cannot have a ubiquitous coverage or a blanketed coverage across the city. It is going to build up the time, right? It's going to build up the time. So eventually, all networks will have to coexist, they'll have to cooperate. So instead of saying that, okay, this is the standalone Wi-Fi network, this is a standalone legacy network, working either on GSM or something else, there has to be a roaming arrangement, wherein if it's a Wi-Fi operator, he has a fallback arrangement on any of the existing GSM, 2G, 3G networks, or if it's a GSM operator, maybe it's a 2G operator, 3G operator, or even a LTE operator, to offload this traffic to have better quality of service indoors, he can actually offload it off to Wi-Fi. It needs to be completely seamless. So again, once we have a seamless network layer where we have standard roaming arrangements, then I think once we start providing services, and these are built on top of this, things will be more seamless, more acceptable. And finally, I think the customers need a good quality service. They really don't care which technology we are using to offer that service to them, right? So eventually, if I need access anywhere, and if it's a seamless switchover, I really don't know which technology I'm using, which network I'm using, but my experience is uninterrupted, my experience is great, I'm really going to love that service. And I think these are some considerations that we really need to look at while we define or deploy any next generation networks, including carrier Wi-Fi.
I guess some of those objectives, and we're talking about design consideration, but what would the vendor, from your experience with other operators, how would the 2 operators like them, or any other operators out there that want to deploy the carrier-grade Wi-Fi, how would they be able to buy the solution because they need funding to do that, and what sort of revenue they can generate for that. I would think that would be one of the consideration when you want to build a high-grade, a carrier-grade Wi-Fi. Maybe you can share some of the experience. Maybe you can start with Clayton first.
So, yeah, we had an interesting panel yesterday talking about monetization strategies, and I think one of the things, without coming to any strong conclusions, one of the things we understood is that some of the traditional models that were top of mind, you mentioned that you've made a list, I think, of 10, right, when you started your Wi-Fi network, and none of them worked. I thought that was very, very interesting. You think of advertising, you think of, even in small-scale roaming may not be, unless you have that ubiquitous footprint. So, as a vendor who is farther down in that stack that you described, right? I'm about connections, I'm about creating the scale, about creating the abstraction then to the service model. And I think that abstraction is very important, right? Networking and all the way up to application, service and application. I think creating those abstractions really goes a long way towards having the flexibility to determine what the right service model is. We talked about roaming, we talked about, in many cases, the right way to monetize is simply to have the footprint and make the connection effortless and intuitive. Yesterday I made the example that Facebook and Instagram and all these folks, WeChat, they are in the business of trying to get people to stay on their platforms as long as possible to monetize it. When in fact, mobile networks are really in the business of having people connect as quickly as possible and getting out of the way. That's what we've done. And I still think that there's a model there that serves us very well. To your point about blending together licensed and unlicensed wireless technologies, it's my belief that the licensed world, the 3GPP world, has, with their device-level addressability, being able to provide services to individual devices, they have had a path towards monetizing things like parental controls, other type of device-specific services that to date on Wi-Fi we don't have. We deal with things on an access point layer, and we're just giving people kind of utility IP service. I think that's one of the strongest arguments for combining the two networks technologies, because that way we can have that device-level service addressability inside Wi-Fi, which we really don't have today. The OTT guys do because they provide apps. All you do is launch an app and you're out of the ecosystem of the service provider. So to me, one of the strongest potentials for monetization of Wi-Fi rests in the blending of the two networks together.
Good. Ronnie, you have any further comment on that?
Clayton couldn't have said it, I couldn't have said it any better than Clayton, and that's what we've been talking about as well. And I believe that when we get into discussions with around the notion of how do you monetize Wi-Fi, and John, to your point, you made a lot of efforts and nothing really seems to work yet. As Clayton says, we do believe that if you begin to treat these networks as a multi-bearer access network, purely agnostic to the modulation schemes that are on there, and you use them to create a consistent and contiguous service delivery layer on top, that is in effect monetizing that Wi-Fi. You're not drawing direct revenue for a service to the customer called Wi-Fi, but what you are doing is, you're maximizing your coverage and your reach to your consumer. You are maximizing your ability to deliver a consistent service layer and value to your customer, and it becomes part of your value proposition. Where does it benefit you? Well, whether it benefits you on the CapEx side or if it benefits you on the OpEx side, there are benefits to be had as a result. But the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, is that the sooner we get away from the notion of I have to sell you a service called Wi-Fi, much more to the point of treating Wi-Fi as yet another bearer to reach the consumer, and I have a service delivery model on top of that, I think the quicker we'll come to better understanding how best to strategically exploit Wi-Fi in our networks.
Okay, I guess, from the two-vendor point of view, we are selling a solution to probably the incumbent carrier. They can make use of it for better quality of service. Maybe now we hear from the two Wi-Fi only service provider on whether you agree with the input, and how would you position yourself to generate revenue, either by yourself or working with the incumbent carrier.
See, again, if we start talking about the present environment that exists everywhere in any country, the problem is with any incumbent operator, for more services to be delivered, for more data to travel on their network, they need more spectrum. And that's, again, the most scarce commodity that we have. Instead, when we start acquiring more, we end up investing more in CapEx, right? So eventually, the alternative is we start moving towards de-licensed fans. And the most affordable alternative, again, comes to Wi-Fi, because it's already mature technology. Ecosystem of devices do exist. I think even the cheapest of the smartphones come with Wi-Fi inbuilt. So I think that's, again, where the opportunity is. But yes, there's a problem also. We do see Wi-Fi access points in every home, whether they're connected wirelessly or they're connected using DSL or fiber. But the problem is, again, it's a completely unplanned network. There's nothing planned. It can actually result in self-interference, killing quality of service. A lot more issues might crop up. So what eventually works in anybody's favor, it can be a Wi-Fi only operator, it can be an incumbent carrier deploying Wi-Fi networks. The only thing I think where we can actually move in is, instead of selling a Wi-Fi box, moving it in, it should be a service that's sold to the customer rather than anything else, wherein we have access to the CP that resides inside the customer's home. We manage it as an extended RAN for us. And again, we are able to manage, monitor, and effectively, troubleshoot it wherever required. And I think that's going to be the way forward. Because presently, the present models, Wi-Fi is only used as one of the distribution mechanisms for connecting our multiple devices that we have at home. It's not being used as a very mature parallel radio access technology. I think this is something that we really need to outgrow from. Because even Wi-Fi has outgrown from being an indoor technology to be something that can really be deployed in carrier-grade networks. Yes, network architecture, network engineering has a very important role to play. But when we start looking at things, this mindset has to change. So overall, instead of it being just a distribution technology, it being a technology which helps us connect, use our existing connections to connect multiple devices, we take it as an extension to the parallel radio access network and manage it as effectively as we manage our standard radio access networks across our tower sites or other places. I think that's what we'll have to look at. If this is planned well, it's managed well, it's monitored well, we can expect better quality of services. And again, it's going to help operators, because to provide better services, better indoor penetration, they again don't need more outdoor infrastructure, they won't need more spectrum to carry the ever increasing data traffic. So that should help, and it should be a very good payback mechanism for them. Again, they have two options. One is they move ahead, start building those networks on their own. The second option is, again, it's the emergence of Wi-Fi only carriers, where the opportunity exists, because for them, that's their competency. For a GSM carrier, it's not going to be a competency, it's going to be a supporting architecture that they eventually utilize to support their existing services. And again, my observation, my discussions till date with any of the operators are, they really don't want to discount their architecture, their existing networks, because again, they feel they have invested a lot of money in existing infrastructure, and till the time it's completely monetized, they don't need a parallel radio access technology. So the focus is critically low. If we talk about Wi-Fi only operators, for them that's a competency. They've been working on it, right? So if eventually you start engaging with Wi-Fi only operators and you start partnering them, you start offloading your traffic onto their networks, I think it makes a lot of sense. And again, you can have committed quality of services from there.
Yeah.
That is what we can look at.
Do Australia has the same experience as well?
I think so. I'd like to add that.
Sure.
So treating Wi-Fi as a bearer is not realising its full potential. It has a lot of power and location, which you can't forget from the macro environment. Right? But Wi-Fi, when you're near an AP, for a smartphone to work, you need to be within 30 to 100 metres. That's a really tight location on the customer. We don't even know yet what the full potential is. What we're doing in some of our research and some of our vendors are starting to show us, if you've seen the film Minority Report with Tom Cruise, that that paints a bit of a picture of the future and what will happen with the data analytics. We're doing things that go beyond that movie already.
Okay. Well, now I'd like to open to the floor, whether you have any question that you want to like to ask the panelists. Any questions on business model, technology, or HackNet? No? So, yeah, John?
Add something while I've got the soapbox. One of the biggest problems we see with managing Wi-Fi networks and extracting performance from them is that everyone talks about the interference and the background noise, and the majority of that noise is from the legacy 802.11b protocol that streams out data at 1 megabit per second. And some of the biggest offenders are our own retail shops. So we sell devices that are set by default to use this old standard because we want to be backwards compatible. And if I could just employ everyone out there to speak to your products people and have them stop selling devices that do that. Right? They can be configured by default to use a much higher speed and no customers will notice the difference.
Okay. Well, I guess if there's no questions on the floor, I guess we'll continue with some of the questions I have here. Is to ensure what sort of technology that we can actually deploy to continue to improve and maintain the quality of service and the quality of experience on carrier-grade Wi-Fi. Maybe we do the reverse. We hear it from the operator first, what they plan to do, and then maybe then the vendor can describe their solution to it as well. Quality to improve your quality of service and quality of experience.
Can you please repeat? I exactly didn't get what you want to hear.
No, it's what technology or solution that you as operators has looked in and plan to use to maintain the quality of service and quality of experience of the Wi-Fi network that you have deployed.
Okay. See, eventually when we start looking at things, so again, I think I spoke about it yesterday. So I again feel there's a disconnect somewhere. Because at the end of the day, as operators, we find different problems while deploying networks, managing them, moving ahead with things, and these can be region specific, even city specific, right? So what operators offer you is a standard vanilla solution. Again, that's not a problem for them because that's that's a business model. They need something that's scalable. And same as what we look at again. If we are looking at some network architecture, some network topology, we again want it to be scalable. We really want that we can leverage it to the maximum. But again, what we start looking at is, see, right now, again, even from the vendor's perspective, Wi-Fi is not completely outgrown to its maximum potential. So we'll have to start considering it from a perspective wherein, right, let's start from the hardware, wherein it's engineered well to suit outdoor environments, it's engineered well to coexist with existing infrastructure, to operate based on different business models. So what is happening today is instead of architecting our own architecture, making things workable, there's a set of standard things that are defined. This product works in this particular fashion. Okay, if you really don't want to do it like this, these are the limitations that the product has. So eventually I think those limitations need to go off. That is the first thing. The second thing is the manageability of the complete package. So, and see, again, we know we are operating in a de-licensed band. It has its own anomalies. So we cannot eventually, it's more like, while you're operating in the licensed band, it's like you're running on an access controlled highway, wherein you have access to a particular lane, nobody comes in. Using a de-licensed band, it's more on a cluttered highway, wherein you'll need better driving skills to drive in. Else you will get stuck up somewhere in the traffic jam. So eventually, I think it has to be a mix of both. The right product, right hardware, right management solutions. Because if we look at things, it has a network in an unlicensed band needs continuous monitoring. And that is where everyone is failing. With deploy AP, we feel that there are heartbeat signals going back to the management platform or our NMS, and we are happy, okay, fine, it's still live, it's running. So we are not monitoring interference, we are not monitoring traffic on a regular basis. And again, it's not only the network, there can be anything that interferes with it. These can be operator networks, these can be home networks, these can be anything. So at the end of the day, we need a solution that's intelligent enough to recognize from where the interference is actually coming from. It self-heals, it self-adjusts. If required, there's a frequency rearrangement that's done. So we need a very intelligent solution that's very, very intuitive. It's not standardized because the present solutions can be carrier enterprise grade, but they're not carrier grade solutions. What we're trying to do is we are trying to extend enterprise grade solutions for carrier-based deployments, and that's a basic problem.
Okay. Right. I guess those are some of your requirements. Yeah.
Yes, these are requirements.
Correct.
See again, from the requirements perspective, what works pretty well is we need to recognize where we are falling short of.
Okay.
And how it can operate as a standalone service. Because, see, practically what we start talking about today is how it can complement or rather supplement existing networks. But the problem here is when we talk of complementing or supplementing existing networks, we are not talking about the ubiquitous network. We are not talking about the standalone network which can sustain on its own. So if we start talking about a network that's completely sustainable, that can operate on its own, so again, we need better ecosystem supported.
Understood. Yeah, I think maybe then we get John. Maybe you can also share some of your selection criteria for a vendor.
I guess some of that wish list there of being able to monitor interference and know what devices are there. We do that today, and what we've learned from that is that there's no substitute for actual user experience. Right. So we found that the only way to ensure a consistent, high-quality experience is to send people out in the field with devices to measure and sample the network.
Right.
We find scenarios where we mount the AP up on a pole, so we get great coverage, and the heuristics, the monitoring, also everything is fine. And down at the street level, it's next to one of the retail shops I mentioned earlier,
right.
And the noise floor is above the safe level of radiation.
On some of your vendor selection, maybe you can share with the audience here. In IINet, who do you use?
So don't want to push vendors too much, but we use Cisco in our network exclusively, and it comes with all these wonderful features out of the box.
See again, what is going to happen is for doing anything that's that doesn't exist as of now, and we are trying to experiment with different business models. So what operators will have to do, they'll have to outgrow technology companies as well. So instead, wherein there's a gap, you'll have to start building up things yourself. That is how things are going to move ahead. Like, if we start, okay, fine, let's take an example. There are two Wi-Fi carriers in the US. I think somebody spoke about them yesterday also. One is Crash Wireless and Republic Wireless. So when it comes to their business model, eventually, if you think there was a ready-made solution available to it, no, right? So eventually, if they would have gone to any vendor, so the first answer they would have received is, okay, fine, it's not the possibility, right? So, once you start realizing potential of a particular service offering and it does not exist and you're confident about it, then you again need to put your engineering efforts together and put something forward so that again you can offer a differentiated service. Because when we talk about service differentiation, innovation is again the key. We cannot follow what's available as a standard, what's available in the market. Again, that's not going to be a service differentiator for anyone. So we'll have to outgrow as technology companies, we'll have to move ahead. Because we are monitoring, we are experiencing our networks every second. And the kind of information we have about the networks, the kind of information we have about the customer behavior, the experience, nobody else can have it. And I think we are the best people to judge it, we are best people to move ahead with it. Again, there can be partnerships because again, developing products cannot be a competency at all, right? If we start talking about it. So again, we all need to work as an ecosystem. We'll have to collaboratively work, move ahead, wherein, we work very closely, maybe our products team, our network engineering team, network operations team works very closely with the products team of the vendors, wherein things can be further, brought to their knowledge and they start working on it. I think that is something that will really happen and that needs to be looked at.
We also engage our social media team actually monitors Facebook, Twitter and Instagram and looks for examples where someone's complained about poor user experience. We act on that within hours.
Okay.
So if the question is, what technologies should be implemented to improve quality of experience and guarantee quality of experience in a carrier Wi-Fi network, asking a vendor, I think, is probably a trick question. I can say generally, obviously we're in the business of doing Wi-Fi gateways. It's the equivalent of a packet port for Wi-Fi. If you're doing that at a very high scale, and doing it again with that device level addressability that I talked about before. Quality of experience, quality of service can be viewed in one way as a relationship between an application and the demands of that application and the requirements it makes of the underlying network and how those are delivered across a number of different network elements. And you've had great success. We talked before the panel about end-to-end solution from Cisco in the outdoor environment. And when you have an end-to-end solution from a single vendor, there are a lot of opportunities to get a force multiplier, if you will. The flip side of that is you have a single vendor, and so the economics of that may not be as good as individual best-in-class technology. So it's a choice for you as a service provider of doing systems integration work across what might be the best of class. And I'm not saying that Cisco's not, because they're a former employer of mine. So, but there's also an idea that if you want to take the best-in-class technologies for access points, or have multiple vendors for access points, multiple vendors for WAG, multiple vendors for any sort of portion of the network. The underlying idea is that to provide that quality of service, to really understand the relationship between the applications your customers are using and the demands and the requirements that they put on the underlying network, and how you deliver that and create that relationship between those two things. Again, today we're in a world where we are relying on access points to make a lot of decisions about the quality of service on the RF, on the clients that are connected. In the future, I see that decision making shared not only between the access point, between the core network, which speaks to the revolution we've had in cloud technologies and software and innovation, right? Moving some of that intelligence, remove some of the orchestration necessities, and allows us to really centralize and get better leverage on the ultimate quality of the service that we provide to all clients across the entire network, not just a single access point.
Okay. Lonnie, you like to supplement?
I don't know how you top all that. I think that I think the fundamental message here is you have to think not only end-to-end from the perspective of the ingress to the egress. You have to think about your processes behind this. You have to think about social media. You have to think about being able to talk to your consumer and understanding your customers, understanding when things are right, understanding when things are wrong. But one additional piece, and we very likely touched on the services layer, is, again, I'm a vendor. Coming from our perspective, the add to that is that we're not working with just one network anymore. We're working with multiple networks, and i.e., hence the whole notion around this head net. And I will be the bad guy to stand up and say, look, I've had terrible mobile cellular experiences. I've had terrible Wi-Fi experiences. We've got an opportunity now through this head net approach that we can try to make the best out of two environments to bring them together to create a consistent service delivery architecture. Now, that implies a lot of things, obviously. Somebody touched on it today, the notion of seamlessness. If we're going to have multiple bearers at our, for our use at any moment in time, we've got to be able to select between those bearers in a very seamless and transparent and touchless fashion. If we have to have our consumers going down there and logging into a Wi-Fi every time and giving their credentials in every time, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of simplicity and value to the consumer. So it has to be perfectly seamless. That whole selection process has to be touchless. And John, to your point, understanding what the consumers are saying out there, sending drivers out there to test. Why not turn the device itself into a type of probe so you're measuring all the time in real time what is the quality of the network at that point in time in that location after moving. Taking all of that into account and understanding how not only the physics of the network, not only end-to-end ingress-egress proposition, not only the processes, not only newer tools like social networking and communicating with your consumers, but also focusing on that service layer, ensuring you've got the seamlessness, the transparency, the touchlessness, and the ability to measure in real time and take actions on those measures. I think everything up here that has been said in the last 15, 20 minutes is vital. The issue is, what challenges are you having, and what are your consumers and your customers telling you? Where's the weak point in your infrastructure, and how can you leverage this type of advice to make your customer experience even better?
Okay, I think with that, I would like to close this session, this panelist discussion, and please give a hand to the panelists for spending time with us. The next speaker, the next session,